Hi, so this is one that I've felt is important to make. I have felt this way for a few days, but I've had a bit of a sore throat. Um, so there's a lot of angles to take with this video. Before I get into the main subject, I do want to say briefly a few words about this awful tragedy regarding the Indonesian submarine. Um, Submarine sinking isn't a very common occurrence. There was a disaster in 2017 in Argentina and of course the Kursk disaster in the Barents Sea, the Russian Kursk in 2000, and then back in 1967 there was two disasters with the USSR and the United States in 1 year, and there's been others as well, but it's not a very common occurrence. Nevertheless, I think this tragedy has shown the courage that it takes to be a submariner. I mean, at that depth, there's really minimal chance of survival. And the BBC had a quite sad video of these men um, singing a farewell song. Now, I don't know if that was because they knew that the situation was dire, or that was just a sort of pre-recorded song that was nothing to do with this incident. But either way, it was very poignant and sad. Um, this reminds me of the sort of human interest stories like the Chilean miners of 2010 or the Thai cave boys of 2018. But on this occasion, sadly, the outcome is a tragic one. It's not the only disaster in the world at the moment. There was also a terrible fire in Baghdad in a COVID hospital, or rather, a hospital treating COVID patients, 82 people killed. And there was yet another migrant ferry sinking in the Mediterranean with up to 130 dead off the coast of Libya. So at any one time in the world, there is tragedy, and I'm a bit sentimental with stuff like that. I just think, what would have been going through the minds of those 53 brave submariners. So my thoughts are very much with them and their families. President Widodo made a statement, and it's very sad. It just shows that the world over, to do that job, I mean, to be in armed forces generally takes courage, but to that particular form, it takes a particular kind of naval person to do that. Right, so race relations in America, and any notion that they would be resolved from the outcome of the Derek Chauvin trial was wishful thinking, unfortunately. By the way, if my voice sounds a little bit off, like I say, I had a bit of painful throat earlier, so that might be coming across. I'll try to speak as clearly as possible. I understand that Chauvin's going to be sentenced in less than 8 weeks now. Depending how stiff that sentence is, that could incite more debate. Um, Immediately as the verdict was read, of course, or uh, coinciding with it, there was a young woman shot dead in Columbus. And as is well now reported, she was attacking another young woman with a knife and apparently was going to attack others. The question there is why not use a taser? Why use lethal force? Clearly, she was armed. She was dangerous. So some force should have been used. But I think maybe a taser could have restrained her in that situation. Um, what's come out of this is how policing is done in America. A lot of these shootings seem to happen at routine traffic stops. I came across an article regarding the Dante Wright killing, and apparently there was something wrong with his license plate, and that was one of the reasons for, I believe it was in the Dante Wright case, one of the reasons why he was pulled over. Um, but these are relatively trivial offences, and apparently, one journalist she said that during a pandemic it's incredibly difficult to get a license plate changed on time. There's a long waiting period, and so um, you get these situations where people are pulled over for relatively minor offences and they end up dead. But I don't see it as straightforward as that. I do think there are situations when um, situations get escalated, either by police being overzealous or by people running away and not helping the situation in doing so. Um, I do think there needs to be a serious scrutiny of how police officers go about these sort of routine stops in America. It just seems to happen far too much that it ends up in death. Um, and I'm not one of these people who say that the police, I don't see it as completely one-sided. I think the police do face real threats, and I also think that there's a problem insofar as people rush to judgment about a situation without considering the individual details and circumstances of each case. Now, the problem with Black Lives Matter, as I see it, I've got a lot of issues with them, but one of the main issues is they incite anger and they fan flames about every case where a black suspect is ends up dead, without arguing or without really bothering to get into the details of what exactly happened in that case. I do think you can point out that there is a general problem, right? And there are issues in American policing, such as the absurd qualified immunity. I don't think that any police officer should be above the law, and that is something that needs to change. Qualified immunity, I see no rationale or justification for it other than protecting officers from prosecution. Um, if their responsibility is to uphold the law, then surely they should be setting an example. Surely, if a police officer goes too far, then he or she should be held to account. Now, that's starting to happen now, but this has been going on for a long time. I think back to the Eric Garner case when the officer who was charged with killing him was acquitted. So I'm not blind or dismissive of the anger that is out there, but sadly, when it comes to race in America, it's such a volatile issue, even more volatile than the gun debate, even more volatile than abortion, which are also very hot button topics in American social politics. But nothing is like race in America in terms of sensitivity. I was watching a clip from the Oprah Winfrey show from, it would have been 1991, around the time of the Rodney King verdict, and a young white woman got up in the audience and said she didn't support the officers, but people hadn't seen the whole footage. So she was saying, let's look at the context. Now, I didn't agree with her. I don't think there's any justification for the way those officers laid into Rodney King. But immediately she was shouted down and jeered at, and to the point where she was close to tears. Like I say, I don't agree with her position, but that's just an example of how sensitive race is in America, that there isn't really civil discussion. There's either, one school of thought like Black Lives Matter, critical race theorists, and those on the left who insist that there is deeply entrenched institutional racism, that America is a very racist society, that it's terrible for black people, and they push that narrative. And then there's the other side, which is kind of a reactionary right wing side, I guess, who will always defend the police no matter what, and who are blind to injustices when they happen. But then there's also this moderate centrist spectrum, and I really think they need to have the voices heard. It's just very sad to see what's happening over there because I mean tonight, just switched on CNN and they were covering yet another case of police shooting, and I wonder, is it really helpful? Is this really generating healthy debate, or is it just fanning the flames to report each and every incident that happens as headline news? I mean, my goodness, there's plenty of other things going on in the world right now. The COVID crisis in India, for a start. Now, this was CNN's main headline news. They were focusing on another shooting. It goes without saying that the issue of black on black crime is massively overlooked. Only last weekend, a little girl was shot dead in the crossfire of gangs in, it was either Detroit or Chicago, can't recall, but 7 years old, little black girl. If Black Lives Matter is really about all Black Lives Mattering, then it's not good enough to say, oh, but our campaign only focuses on police brutality. Um, and here's the problem, because there's no civil discourse on this, because there's no just candid discussion, it's all about point scoring and it's all about pointing fingers. You're a racist, you know, and that is far more damaging, I have to say, than anything that BLM's been accused of. Okay, right wingers have called them domestic terrorists, which I think is wrong, but the smear of calling someone racist is profound. Look at what happened to Sharon Osbourne. And I think it was disgraceful, the whole fallout from the Meghan Harry interview. Don Lemon on CNN saying, as a person of colour, I know how she feels. And they're reporting the racism as if it's a fact because it's her truth. You know, let's throw out due process. Let's throw out any sense that there is another side to this. And that's the problem with race in America. There's no critical thinking. It's just, particularly from the perspective of the left, either if you agree with us that this is entirely a question of institutional racism nationwide, otherwise you're the enemy. And especially if you're white, you will absolutely be vilified. You will be accused of being in denial. You'll be accused of white privilege. You'll be accused of all sorts of other things. So when it comes to race, you really, one gets the impression that it's a very, very difficult discussion to have. And I do think that the likes of CNN have a lot to answer for in the incredibly biased way they cover these things. I'm not talking about the Derek Chauvin trial, I'm talking about more broadly. Because with the Chauvin trial, I have no problem with the outcome. I think the jury was fairly selected. They were sequestered. I think it was handled as best as it could be. So I have no issues with that outcome. But I do think if you look at the way that CNN handles race issues, they they never even attempt to get some sort of level playing field. For example, they will get BLM activists on the show and they will just give them free rein to preach and to pontificate and to condemn society and the police and everyone else. But they're not really, you know, held to account. They're not really, no senior CNN anchor will say, well, are you not concerned that, for example, talking about defunding the police will only make problems worse? How do you justify that sort of reckless proposition? Will you take action against racists in your midst, like Yusra Kakali? CNN will never ask those questions. So when you have a powerful network like that not doing the job, not even trying to, I don't want to say show both sides because I don't think it's necessarily a 50-50 situation, but they don't even try to allow scope for critical thinking. CNN is run by pundits. And yeah, Fox News is as well on the other side. But that is a problem with American media in general right now. We're not much better, has to be said. I think we're a bit better, but not much better. Punditry has taken over. Um, and that's unfortunate. I do think there's a place for punditry. When you have a panel of people debating an issue, if it is debate, I mean, so often it's an echo chamber when it comes to CNN. But the situation in America now is, say you had a panel of people on CNN and, they were pushing a certain narrative. Let's say one of them, a token conservative, wants to start criticizing Black Lives Matter. He or she would be absolutely shouted down. Now, to be fair, probably the same thing would happen to a gun control advocate on Fox News. So it does work both ways. But I think when it comes to race, I do think the left is far more manipulative, dishonest overall. Why isn't there a discussion of the severe problem of black on black crime in America? Why not? That's been going on for years and is particularly entrenched in Democrat run cities. There's no getting away from that. So I think the sad thing about this is that people are so entrenched in their views and so tribalized. And and they allow themselves to get so emotive about it that there's no space for critical thinking. So they pigeonhole people in a certain way. You don't agree with me, you are a racist. Or it's because you're white, it's your white privilege, which I think is an obnoxious term. I watched an interview with David Starkey, I mentioned it the other day, and he mentioned that some of these terms are American imports. So I think that whilst I'm talking about the United States here, um, the situation in Britain and America is not the same. You know, when BLM last year was saying Britain's not innocent, well, we're not innocent, no country is. But they were trying to bring the American debate into the UK. Firstly, our police are trained in a completely different way. Um, our police are far less militarized. I'm not saying we don't have cases of police brutality. I'm not saying there isn't police corruption. There is, but it's minimal. I think it is minimal. Um, so well, I think the sad thing about the situation is it's just so polarizing. And ordinary Americans, whether they be black, white, Asian, or Hispanic, they just want to get on with their lives. But you have very powerful media outlets. You have people like the Reverend Al Sharpton and others, politicians as well, who and celebrities. You know, there's powerful people who fuel the flames, and they know they're doing it. Maybe they have justified it to themselves because they say this is the injustice that's happening, so we have to speak about this. Okay, but at least do it in a responsible way. And I don't think much of that is happening. It's very sad. I mean, Martin Luther King would be turning in his grave if he could see what is now happening, because it's no longer about judge a person on the merit of their character, or rather, yeah, judge someone on the merit of their character, not on the color of their skin. Well, according to critical race theorists, it's okay to judge people by the color of the skin because if you're white, you're privileged. If you're black, you're downtrodden. Um, and this intersectionalism in the left it's really damaging, I think. Um, where now you get a situation that even Asian Americans are being told they're not really minorities enough. And then you get the distortion going on. So, for example, with the rise in hate crimes against Asian Americans, um, there was a politician in California, I forget her name now, but she was actually saying that, you know, we need to stand together against the racist Black Lives Matter with the Asian community. But that's negating the fact that a lot of thugs who are attacking Asian Americans are black. So it's trying to imply, you know, we need to stand up against white supremacy. But the rise in hate crimes against Asian Americans, there's a range of culprits involved, a range of factors. Yeah, there will be some white supremacists, but also black racists doing it as well. So the sheer industrial scale distortion that is going on in America regarding the race debate, it's tragic. It really is. And when it comes to race, the UK is different, but that doesn't mean that we don't have issues here in terms of how this is presented. I mean, the government's recent race report, apparently some of the authors of that received death threats. And when you see the sort of rhetoric that Black Lives Matter comes out with, it's hardly surprising. I think we need to reclaim discourse and debate from the power of the mob. This idea that the loudest voice is the only one that's valid. And it's so tragic because if you don't kind of toe the line, if you don't think in an exact echo chamber way regarding Black Lives Matter and uh, other people of that school of thought, let's just say, then you'll absolutely be destroyed. And I think it's tragic. Anyone with any common sense can see a genuinely racist opinion. But what we're seeing now is any any notion of even a microaggression is now being held up as racial hatred. It's just so it's so manipulative and so dishonest. And it's absolutely poisonous for society. It helps no one. Doesn't help black people, doesn't help white people, doesn't help Hispanics or Asian Americans or Native Americans. It helps no one. And that's why I think, something like critical race theory, it's one of the few areas I do agree with President Trump on. The Democrats really want to force that onto the education system. But I think even in America, even allowing for the different history and context, I don't see what it will achieve to, for example, tell white students, um, as my friend Melissa Chen, she recently reported that white students were, these were pupils, children, being told that they should be ashamed of the color of the skin in public school boards. Um, and then black students are told that they're perpetual victims, and all the problems in life can be blamed on white supremacy and institutional racism. Now, I don't say there are no problems. I don't say, for example, when it comes to the police, that there aren't serious problems with police training techniques. For example, why does it always have to result in a gunshot? Why can't taser be used in some of these cases, i.e., non-lethal force? But then again, we do need to look at the individual circumstances of each case. It may be that that was already used, and people are judging from a part of the video rather than the whole video. But I think the most unfortunate thing is that people don't think critically on this, and it could be that they have personally experienced racism. So, not understandably, they're emotional about that. I can understand that because I have strong views on crime from personal experience. I don't blame people for feeling that way, but it is so very important that in debate about race, there has to be freedom for people to be candid without constantly being smeared as a racist. And thanks to the American left, right now that conversation isn't possible because any dissenting views are immediately vilified. That's why I really believe that when it comes to the race issue, the likes of CNN really do have a lot to answer for. It's shameless. And I'm not saying the other side is innocent. Every time they have a knee jerk reaction when a black man is killed by the police, oh, he must be a criminal or he must have been resisting arrest or something like that. That's equally wrong. It's equally dogmatic. And what people need to do is look at each individual case on its own merit. Well, I do believe there is an enormous amount of distortion and manipulation going on, and I think it's very sad. And I really sympathise with American moderates or American just people who abhor racism, but they can see that this narrative is being so weaponized. It's a very sad thing. So, how does America go forward? I'll try and end on a more positive note. And that is actually, I think a lot of individuals are reasonable. They think in a reasonable way. But it's a part of movements. If you probably sat down to have a coffee with an individual BLM member, you'd probably be reasonable enough. But it's the power of the crowd, isn't it? It's strength in numbers. So let's follow the narrative because everyone else is saying it. I do think there's a lack of critical thinking. I'm not just talking about BLM. It applies to the QAnon crowd as well. Um, I mean, the lack of objective thinking of QAnon is frightening. Um, so it really comes down to individuals to just do themselves a service, to really think about things and examine and question themselves as well. That's healthy. I do it. I often think, am I wrong about this? And I reflect on it and I double reflect. And occasionally I do change my positions. Not often. We need to get rid of this idea that, you lose pride or it's somehow insincere if someone changes their position. I mean, politicians are attacked for that. Sometimes changing one's position is the mature and reasonable and objective thing to do. I think the Derek Chauvin case might be a sea change in terms of holding police to account, saying they're not above the law. But I also think that ELM, and I keep coming back to them because they are the main movement involved in this debate in many ways. Their sort of proposals, their failure to recognise that there is a problem within the black community with crime, their absolute, failure to acknowledge that issue, their failure to, and I'm a racist for saying that. That's what they would immediately say. Um, their failure to call out racists in their midst, their absurd proposals, like defunding the police, and the failure of the likes of CNN to hold them to account. I think all those things are problematic. But that's tempered by the fact that there is a lot of ordinary Americans, black, white, Asian, and Hispanic, who just want to get on with their lives. And they really don't want to be sucked into this stuff. So I'm broadly optimistic about the American people, but I do think that this needs to be people need to think critically, not dogmatically. And that's what's missing at the moment. People are thinking dogmatically. They are not trying to just step back just a little bit and think maybe this is more complex than we're implying. Thanks for watching.